Yes, I did play with Shakira. I can confirm that hips don't lie. It's true what they say. Yeah, I moved to Vancouver in '97, pursuing music and audio engineering at coincidentally a school that was called Columbia Academy. Now since defunct, unfortunately, but back then I met Marty Hasselback, who is the gentleman who was the admissions guy there. And he now works at Fully Managed, who is the company that first acquired my first IT services business. So anyways, talking about 2 degrees of separation. Shakira will be very disappointed to hear you just wanted to know about Beyonce. So I started my own IT business in 2006 rather, and in about 5 years it grew to about 5 people, just fairly slowly, very organically. Most service-based businesses are difficult to grow at hyperscale because a lot of manual labor is required. And so in 2011, wanting to avoid, I guess, the heartache and the pain of going through the growth of a company, becoming an HR babysitter, perhaps, as an owner of a small company, I had this opportunity to join Fully Managed. And so I joined Fully Managed, which was now a 35-person company at the time, and Western Canada's largest MSP. For those of you not in the IT business, MSP stands for Managed Services Provider, which is typically an IT provider that does contract-based IT work for small businesses and medium businesses. I lasted about a year and then wanted to go back out on my own because my true calling was to work with those small clients, work with small businesses. I'd liked getting my hands dirty, climbing under desks and connecting cables. That kind of stuff was my fun. And so about a year later, I brought on a business partner thinking I really wanted to try and spread out a little bit of the accountability. And I'm not sure, by show of hands, who here is a small 1, 2, or 3-person business just getting started? A few of you. 50 or more? 100 or more? Okay, so between 3 and 25? Okay, who here is alive? Okay, that's exactly what I thought. And so after about 4 years in IT, or as soon as I launched Ook Enterprises, my new IT business, I realized there was a problem in the documentation space with IT. And so I launched my own platform called Monkeybox, which was a cloud-based software to help IT companies document the IT for their customers. So the idea is, hey, you don't no longer have to remember everything in your head, document it in our solution, become transparent with your customers, and this will help you release some of that burden. 4 years later, fast forward to 2017, IT Glue had taken off quite dramatically in the same space, and I had known Chris, our CEO, for some time, and he convinced me to come on board, given my IT experience, since IT Glue is a product that sells to IT companies, and I had the MSP background in IT, to come on board, and so I did. The obligatory Shakira picture proof. A few years and pounds later. So IT Glue was founded also in 2013. The company started very small, of course, bootstrapped, but always private. IT Glue never raised funds. Which is a fascinating story because it seems that a lot of startups these days are trying to automatically go and raise funds. It just seems like it's the mandatory thing to do. But this is a great story of success in that IT Glue found a space, a niche that was really needed, a solution that was direly missing from the IT space, and they were able to make it work. Chris was also, or is still, a chairman and sits on the board of Fully Managed, one of Western Canada's largest managed services providers, and so continues to have the exposure to the IT business as well. That's Chris. So the idea behind this little talk was to share a few of the things that, in hindsight, have become sort of the markers of where we could have made a small change or a pivot to help the business become more efficient earlier in the process, and not just wait until you're suffering through the pain to realize you need to make a bigger change. And so the first one is don't wait to hire an amazing HR manager. And I think this one sort of speaks for itself, and I know it can be tough in the beginning to hire an experienced HR manager. They command a salary that sometimes is inaccessible to a startup, but at the same time, and I have a very interesting parallel from the IT business, is that most IT businesses that grown to be over 50 or 75 people will immediately tell you one of the first things they should have done is hire a service desk manager, somebody who is really the traffic director between customers and staff. And that is kind of the same role that an HR manager plays in a company that's getting started. It's tough to realize it in the beginning, but one of the most critical factors, I think, that plays a role in a new employee's initial impression or satisfaction with their employer is that onboarding process. And so HR managers really help make that go smoothly. Hire fast and fire fast. Growing a company is really hard. And one of the things that happens very often is that people acquire loyalties to staff and things that sometimes become a drag on the business. And so the hire fast, fire fast concept or idea is really just have a little bit of ability to introspectively look at whether this person is the right fit for the company now. They may have been a good fit early, but not a good fit later, which is what this is about. And again, don't hold the business back for loyalty. And there's a little star there because I wanted to make a comment about that. It sounds maybe a little cruel, but the reality is sometimes there are people that are not necessarily contributing to revenue in a company, and you may feel like you need to cut them, but look at what role they play in the team building of the company, and what role they play in the culture of the company. And so sometimes you do keep some people around even if their performance is not revenue generating. One thing we do at IT Glue is we do revisit the org chart quarterly. In fact, our finance director, when he meets with all the execs, one of the things he says is, you're behind on your hiring. I'm like, okay, I thought we were trying to not spend money. And it turns out that one of the initiatives the company has is to grow by headcount as well. Similar to how you might grow a company by an acquisition. You hire another company, you have the ability to take on more clients, and so the same happens with headcount sometimes. You can't acquire more customers if you don't have the sales staff, perhaps, to speak to those customers. And so looking at the org chart quarterly, revisiting this on a regular basis, and growing by strategy is a really interesting strategy. The finance team is critical too. In chatting with Chris about this talk, one of the things he shared with me is that so many companies start small, obviously, and the owner or founder keeps things very close to their heart for too long. And what happens is they lose sight of the numbers and immediately start being able to make small adjustments in order to pivot or to make changes necessary to keep up with the growth of the industry, the changes of the industry, and so on. When it's been too long, now you have a much bigger pivot, a bigger expense to backtrack on perhaps months of development or whatever it is you're building, and it becomes a cost. And so knowing your numbers cold is critical to this ability to make small adjustments. But also don't forget about profitability. In my small IT business, we grew with a staff of 2 to 1.3 million in recurring revenue. And so a lot of people ask me how we did that, and the answer is, well, rather than trying to get more customers, we tried to learn how to sell more efficiently or strategically to existing customers. Because, well, they're already giving us their money, first of all, and that sounds maybe superficial, but it's true. There's a trust already established, and everybody knows it's harder to sell to a new customer than an existing one. And so by focusing our efforts again on automation, the ability to do updates on those computers automatically through platforms that we invested in, became the way that we could actually scale without having to acquire more cost or take on more people. And so profitability is just as important. Always be generating leads. Now in my case, as a small IT company, we weren't interested in generating leads, but sort of the reverse effect happened of what we wanted, which is because we were doing great work and we were focused on doing great work, people were starting to gravitate naturally towards wanting to work with us, and our customers were referring us to other people. At some point, we had to simply say no and say, sorry, we can't take you on. And that was just the nature of the IT business. But if you're building a company now and you're creating a product that has its own culture, if you will, and it attracts those customers and it wants to get people to share your idea and your success with others, then you may have a winning solution there. So be very attentive to those signs so you can harness that when they present itself. The conversion rate is really critical. We talk about this at IT Glue all the time. We have gotten it down to a science where we know from every single event that we attend or every sponsorship what kind of cost a single lead or a single customer has to our business. And that helps greatly to understand how to market properly, only because marketing without this knowledge just means you are trial and error. And so this trial and error can become very expensive in the early stages, of course. Number 4, process matters. Now, IT Glue was born from helping IT companies build process around their own operations. And so one of the things that we talk a lot about is the concept of lean. Is anybody here familiar with lean, the Toyota production system, reducing waste in your business? So we've got lots of great resources on this. I'd suggest if you are interested in this topic, visit our website at itglue.com and look for lean topics. We have a nice ebook about this. It applies to almost every business in some way or another. But the story we tell around the IT business is very relevant to tech as well. One of the things that's interesting about process is that a lot of people find out too late when waste has crept into their business. And so in IT companies, to give you an example, because this is the market that we know very well, IDC reports that on average, people spend 20% of their time just looking for information. So consider a new person that comes on board at your company, and all they're doing for the first couple weeks is tapping others on the shoulder to find out information about what their job or what they need to do. So immediately, it's not just the wasted time of the person that's already there, but it takes on average 15 to 30 minutes for that person to get back to what they were doing. And that's just the time waste of their time, never mind the opportunity cost. So in small IT companies, this often averages out to be a couple $100,000 a year for a small company of 10. So the process is also what sets you up for scalability. If you all of a sudden have to hire 5, 10, 20 people at once because you did get that round of funding, are you set up for onboarding everybody quickly, for getting everybody up to speed, for purchasing? All these things that are operational in nature sometimes are not manifested to be a poor process until you have to do them all very quickly in rapid succession. I attended a great session last summer by a gentleman at IBM who was in charge of the Mac program. They basically introduced the ability for employees to request any kind of computer they wanted, Mac or PC. So the scale has definitely shifted towards the Mac side, and at one point they were deploying about 1,000 Macs per week. Think about that for a second, 1,000 Macs per week. So imagine one person in a room imaging or getting 1,000 computers ready per week. It's not possible. So scalability, automation, these are critical things that as developers know, your automated tests, all these things, when you don't invest them in the beginning, you'll end up paying the price in the end. My 5th point here is to keep it fun. And I'll just try to stress that one simply doesn't define culture. You can't say our company culture is this and then hope people just latch on. It's something that is born from within. How you behave as business owners or colleagues, et cetera, is what becomes the culture of the company. Sometimes products take a culture of their own on, so it's important to watch for this. So that's my little talk. I wanted to leave a little bit. I'm not sure, Pindi, how much time we have, if there's enough time for some questions, or? Oh, at the very end? Okay. Oh, right now, perfect. Or say it out loud, I'll repeat it. mark of a great speaker. No questions.
No, that's not fair. Well, you guys have grown so much in the last, I think, year. Is that when most of the growth's happened?
Yeah, about that. About a year ago, about 20 staff, and the last count was 85.
And when we were talking, you were saying their office is split over 2 floors. How are you sustaining culture with sales outside of the mix? Because we rock sales.
Beautifully. No, I'm kidding, of course. Well, sales are the noisy folks, as you know. And so when we realized we had to take over some additional space, the first realization was like, great, we can get rid of sales, finally. Move them to another floor. No, but the reality is it's tough to split the company into different floors because there's a lot of dynamics of like short conversations, hey, what do you think about this? That happens sort of the water cooler talk, if you will, that it's tough to do across 2 floors. And so on the bonus side, people are getting a little more exercise because they're using the stairs to go 2 floors. But at the same time, there's a lot of chats that now you have to like set up a meeting because you don't know if they're available. You don't see them sort of walk out of the office. You can't intercept. And so that's been a little tricky. I think in retrospect, maybe a single floor operation would have been a better idea at this stage. But it was easier to stay than to move the whole office. So.
One more question, and then I'm going to open it up. So you talked a little bit about process, and as that's your meat and bread, or meat and butter, or bread and butter. You can tell English is not my first language. Bread and butter. I was listening to a conversation with the CEO of Google and the idea of process kind of hindering innovation. How do you feel documentation helps to elevate innovation?
Well, I think they're 2 separate things in a way. Albert Einstein, I think, is who said the ability to change is a sign of intelligence. And I think a process is not necessarily to prevent change, but is just to prevent ambiguity. And so a lot of the things that we talk about with our customers about process is removing the question mark and not necessarily preventing innovation. I think innovation happens on its own outside of process potentially. So yeah, I don't think they're mutually inclusive.
I like that you had to think about the right word, like I did a few seconds ago. Any other questions? Oh, sure. Go ahead, Jake.
So first off, we're an MSP who launches a product, and I'm just curious to know, with the growth you've experienced, what are your guys' biggest challenges here in Vancouver?
Thanks. The question for everybody else, Jake, is I guess with the IT company that uses our product and he loves it. Thanks, Jake. And what is the biggest challenge growth-wise? What's interesting about growth right now is that because we have been keeping track of some of the finance stuff, it's easy to make the smaller adjustments and try things that are on a smaller scale, smaller adjustments, and see what kind of effect they have. I don't know that that was necessarily always the case, where sometimes you see, oh, this is not working. And in an IT company, this happens all the time. You buy a backup platform for all your customers, and oh, we didn't. You can't manage what you don't report on. The metrics you don't know, you can't manage. And so I think one of the critical things for any business is to understand what metrics are critical to their success and to watch those very closely to allow yourselves that growth. From a sales perspective, the good news is we've only addressed like a very small percentage of our potential market, and so I think the sky is the limit. But I think from a product perspective, we're learning a lot of things. I came on board when there was no product team, so we're building that out and finding our way. So that's been an interesting part of the process. Hope that helps.
I wanted to ask you regarding the feedback that you get from customers, current customers, because you were saying that you focus, or you used to focus on getting more revenue from existing customers. How do you get feedback from them? How do you decide which of that people needs to convert new features?
Okay. So the question was regarding the feedback we get from customers regarding acquiring more business from existing customers. How do we know what we're going to turn into a new feature to put back in the product? So there's two answers to this. One is the IT answer, and the other is the software answer, because they're like drastically different pieces of work and business. But in the IT side, one of the things I learned how to do early on was to have the quarterly business reviews with customers where we help them identify their risk. As an IT company, one of the things that was critical is we want to make sure the customer knows where there's potential downfalls in their environment. The biggest challenge is not to do that from a standpoint of fear-mongering, trying to scare them into buying something because if they don't, your network is going to crash or whatever, but rather, hey, are you comfortable with this risk over here? Yes or no? We're cool either way as long as you realize that we're not like assuming all the risk in that case. And so having those on a regular basis meant we had the ability to tell customers where to invest their money technology-wise, and we could have more business-focused conversations around that. On the software side, what's interesting about feature requests is that sometimes they start with one vote in a feature request portal. We use AHA currently for our feature requests. And then they gather some steam over time, a couple votes here, 3 votes there. A year later, they might have 50 votes. And at this point, it's like, I requested this feature a year ago. Why haven't you built it yet? Oh, well, now it has 50 votes. Let's have a conversation. But so one thing is, I hear lots of different, if anybody has read Rework, have anybody read that book by the guys from Basecamp? So one of the things he says is that they don't listen to feature requests at all. And they ignore them altogether. And so it got me thinking one day, should we be like not listening to this and just wait until something is noisy or bubbles up to the surface before we pay attention to it? And there's one thing that I've realized is that quickly creates like a relationship of tension between customers and your product. And that's really tough to have. And so I don't know if this was a mistake or the right thing to do, but literally the first weekend I started with IT Glue, the first thing I did is I jumped into the ideas portal and started like responding to feature requests or like challenging or asking for business use cases like, why do you want this? We're not going to do that if you can't tell me why you need it or how that works or why it's valuable. So immediately there's like the awakening of everybody that had been dormant with a feature request sitting there for a year or 2 years, and everybody wanted to kill me for the first weekend or so. I'm not kidding, this was like a Friday night, and I had to ride this out all weekend, like responding to every single thing and making my case and my point. But it turns out a couple months in, people have approached me at conferences that we've attended and said, listen, I really appreciate you spending the time to engage with us and like giving us straight information. And so I'd say that's probably one of the most important things, whether you develop that feature or not, is to have an honest conversation about why do you need that, tell me your business use case, and try to be honest about why it's important or not. Obviously internally you have to build a rating scale. You have to balance whether that feature is high value, low value, high impact, high value, high impact, low value. So those things ultimately will help you define your process, but being transparent about it helps for sure.
It sounds like quite the matrix. No? Okay. Bad joke. Thank you so much for coming out today, Luis. Are you sticking around for a while?
Yeah, for sure. I'll stick
Okay.
around. I don't know if my edit was live or not. No.
No.
So at Luis Giraldo on Twitter or LinkedIn or anywhere else. And I'm happy to chat about small business growth or larger business growth anytime. We're over at the Sun Tower. We're hiring as well. We have about 10 open positions currently. And so I'm always up for a coffee conversation about any topic, anytime.
Okay, awesome. Thank
Thanks.
you so much.